I'm always a little leery. Okay, we're all set. It's I know as a small church, it's always tough. You never know what to expect from week to week, but understand this: you never know who's going to come through that door who needs help from Jesus. You just never know. We had a couple weeks ago. I play drums in our church band and our church worship team, and we were singing a soft worship song, got to the end of it, and all of a sudden this lady comes, she's got a ball hat on, and she just comes running up to the front of the altar and just kneels there, and she's just sobbing, what in the world, is going on? Because it was just out of the blue, it wasn't anything we said. It was a nice worship song, but it really wasn't an invitation song. But that's what we pray for, right? You pray that God would spring somebody through your door that is looking for help and that you have the answers. So we shouldn't be surprised of that. You just never know when that's going to happen, when God's going to, pull that on you. So fortunately we have 3 elders, and they're always ready to meet needs. We're always ready. That when God sends someone through the door, they're the ones who are going to pray with them. And fortunately, one of our elders came up, knelt with her, and prayed, and just was a real victory there. I'm not sure exactly. I don't know what it was, but we just stopped and we just played softly, on our instruments, and we saw a young lady get up and leave with power in her life because she had met God, and someone had prayed with her. So you just never know, all right, who's going to come through that door, who needs help. Just keep it open, all right? Well, it's always good to share with you. It's always good to be here. My friends at Fairhaven, folks have been good to me, and I consider this sort of my second family. I know you'd like to be first family, but I do have a church that I have to call my first family, all right? And I'm an elder there, so I don't pastor anymore. I miss it. So that's the one thing that I sort of count myself as. I'm not your pastor. I'm not your full-time pastor, but at least in my heart, I feel I like to pastor you, all right? A pastor is a shepherd, and he warns, and he keeps the flock together and encourages. That's important also. So I hope I can do those things. Genesis chapter 32 is where we're going to be at. Actually, our pastor, I preached this from this passage, it was about a year ago. But then our pastor has been preaching through some books in the Old Testament, and he came across this particular story, and I was looking at it, just something new came to me all of a sudden. The Lord just said, that's something that you need to share. So I sort of worked it together, and it's sort of an important part of this wrestling match that Jacob has with this angel, all right? So and I'm just simply titling it, Through It All, the good, the bad, and where is God's grace through it all? And Jacob is the character here. Let's look at the scripture verses first of all. Jacob wrestles, let me set the stage for you. You might not know about it. In the book of Genesis, the father Abraham is the very first person that God calls to start a nation of people that would worship him only. Abraham had a son, Isaac. Isaac then has twin boys, Jacob and Esau. Well, Esau is the oldest. He should get the birthright, but lo and behold, Jacob swindles him, cheats him out of his birthright. And they're never real good. They're never friends after that. And in fact, Jacob splits to another part of the country, becomes very wealthy, raises a family. And then one day he finds out that Esau, someone comes to him and says, your brother is here, he's coming. He's got 400 men out there. And we don't know what he's going to do. And Jacob gets scared. He said, my brother is coming, for he's going to get even with me for stealing his birthright. Now, Jacob has never been right with God up to this point, all right? He's always been a swindler, a cheater. He doesn't even pray for himself. You know, in the first part, in verse 9 of Genesis 32, you know who he goes to? He goes to his grandfather Abraham, and he says, pray for me. He says, go to Abraham and have Abraham pray for me that Esau spares my life, and that he's not going to come and get revenge on me. So just have Granddad pray for me. Jacob can't even pray for himself. He doesn't even go to God himself. So we come to this, and he sends everybody ahead. He sends this entourage, and he's got a zoo full of, critters, animals that he's sending forward that hopefully they'll appease Esau. They're sort of a present, to him. And he sends everybody ahead, and he says, I'm going to stay back here. It's sort of like the general sending all the soldiers out to the front line. I'm going to stay back here. Jacob then is left alone, and we pick up this story. And Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he could not defeat him, he struck Jacob's hip socket as they wrestled and dislocated his hip. Then he said to Jacob, let me go, for it's daybreak. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. What's your name? The man asked. Jacob. Your name will no longer be Jacob. He said it will be Israel, because, let's go on to the next screen here. Okay. Your name will no longer be Jacob, it will be Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. Then Jacob asked him, please tell me your name. But he answered, why do you ask my name? And he blessed him there. Now that's sort of important, that name thing, because when the angel asked him, what's your name? He's saying, who are you really? Because the name Jacob actually has the connotation of being a cheat and a fraud. So the angel is saying, who are you? Deep down, what are you in God's presence? So that's sort of how that goes there. And Jacob then named the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been spared. The sun shone on him as he passed by Peniel, limping because of his hip. And we'll stop right there with the story. And it goes like this, and my message is this morning. Jacob's got something he wanted, and he got something he didn't want. Go back and look at Jacob. He said, I won't let you go until you bless me. Now, he never had to fight for anything in his life. It was always given to him, or he connived for it. And the angel blessed him. But the word blessing there, it says when the angel blessed him, it doesn't mean he's going to make him happy. We think, I want to be blessed because I want to be happy. It's not the connotation. In the Hebrew word blessed there, it means a transfer of power. In other words, Jacob's saying, I'm not going to let you go unless you give me some power, the power of God, because I don't have it in my life. And so literally the angel transferred the power of God to Jacob. Now, there's always been something a little fishy to me about this story. The angel said, let me go. And Jacob said, I won't let you go unless you bless me. Now, I have to ask the question, do you really believe that the angel was stronger than Jacob, or that Jacob was stronger than the angel? Do you really believe that the angel couldn't get away from Jacob in that wrestling match? Couldn't get loose from him? I believe that fight was fixed right from the beginning. It was determined ahead of time. I think what the angel was saying was this: let me go, Jacob. But under his breath, he was saying, but I hope you don't. If you hang on a little longer, you'll get the blessing of God. And Jacob then limped away with the strength of an angel, and the angel gave him that power, blessed him, transferred to him some power of God into his life. But then he did something else. The angel popped him on the hip to remind him where he got the blessing. And for the rest of his life, Jacob, every time he took a step, he was reminded of his weakness. You see, he got something that he wanted, and he got something that he didn't want. He got the blessing of God, he got the power of God, but he also got the limp. You see, let me get this going here. Here we go. Good and bad run on parallel tracks, and they usually arrive about the same time. Now, that's true not just for Jacob. That's true for every child of God here today. Good and bad run on parallel tracks in our lives, and many times they arrive about the same time. Let me explain how that is. See, we're thankful to God for one thing in spite of something else. And that's a surprise to us, because I thought that when you got it all together, my goodness, when you're as young as Ron and Betty or me, when you've learned how to pray, when you learned how to really live for God, and you finally arrive at being a good Christian, and then there'll be nothing but blessing, blessing, blessing in your life. Just good stuff, good stuff, good stuff. All the time. That's the only thing you'll get as a child of God. But that's not the way it is, Ron and Betty, is it? And that's not that's right. Good and bad run on parallel tracks. They usually arrive at about the same. Let me illustrate it this way, a true illustration. I had a lady come to me in my office one day when I was pastoring. And she wasn't a member of our church. She didn't attend our church, but she was a friend of a person in our church. And she sat down, and I asked her, what's happening? And she just started to sob. And she sobbed, and she said, my husband just walked away from our marriage, just walked out. He served me divorce papers. Now she had 2 children who were grown, younger children when they were in their early 20s, and had a brand new grandbaby from one of their daughters. And she was warned about his character flaws. She understood it, but she was a child of God. He was not, and he just walked away from the marriage. I mean, he just walked out. He didn't want to be married anymore. Served the divorce papers, and she just sobbed, and she said, I wish I could just change it all, Pastor. I wish I could just start all over. And so I prayed with her and consoled her, and I really didn't have the answer for her situation that time. I couldn't wave a magic wand. But then after that, a few days after that, I was thinking, daydreaming about it, and I was imagining what I would do if I were God, and I had the power to do something about her situation. I mean, if I were God, and he gave me, and I had the power to change and to answer her request, saying, I wish I could just start all over. I wish I could just change it all. I would go to her, and I got to thinking, I would go to her and I would say this, ma'am, I can change all of this. God has given me a special power, and I can reverse your entire situation. I can turn back the clock, I can turn back the calendar, and I can make it so that you never met this guy, that you never fell in love, that you never felt this pain, and you can start all over from scratch, from the beginning. I can do that right now. You want me to do that right now? And I got to thinking what her response would be. But first I'd have to say, now, there's one thing I forgot to mention. you realize if I reverse this process, you'll have to give up your 2 wonderful children that you love. And oh, by the way, you'll have to give up that brand new grandbaby that just came into the world. You understand that's what goes along with this. And I can hear her asking, what's that? I didn't hear you. You don't want to give up your children? You don't want that grandbaby erased from history and from your memory? Well, yeah, but you want to get rid of the pain, don't you? I mean, you want to start all over. You don't want this guy walking out on you. You don't want to feel that hurt and embarrassment. You don't want that heartache now, do you? Well, you can't have both. You know, I think most of us think that this Christian life says that one of these days I'm going to get everything settled. I'm going to get all the boards nailed down. I'm going to get all the cobwebs cleaned out of my cupboards. And then finally, there'll be nothing left but good stuff coming to me. I mean, I'm going to finally be at the place where I'm just going to have blessing after blessing. We say, right now, there's some stuff in my life that's not right. It's not good. It's not comfortable. But there's also some good stuff in my life, and I like that. So what right now really doesn't count because I've got this bad stuff and I got this hurts. But one of these days when everything is worked out, one of these days when I finish school, when I get married, when I have children, when I have grandchildren, when the kids are all raised, when I'm finally got it right with my husband. But right now, this really isn't God's best for me because even though there's some good stuff happening to me, there's also some bad things happening. And I know that's not the way it's supposed to be as a believer, as a Christian. So I think I'll just pull over on this side of the road here and wait it out until finally I get everything right. Then I'll get some blessing from God. We think once I get everything together, there'll be nothing but good stuff coming down the pike. And we hear that from, sad to say, a lot of TV preachers. So let me just give you a warning here. You know, the whole gospel of health, wealth, and prosperity is not a true gospel. It's not. Because bad things happen to us, don't they? But we look at the verses of Scripture many times. We look at the good that the Bible promises us. Look at the verses. Who satisfies your years with good things so that your youth is renewed like the eagle. Or so if you, despite being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, Jesus said this, how much more will your Father in heaven give good things to those who ask Him? Or Jeremiah 29. We quote this all the time at graduation services and you know, whatever. You know this verse. For I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans for prosperity and not for disaster, to give you a future and hope. And we look at that verses and we say, that's where it's at, God, right there. I'm not minimizing those promises, all right? Because those are all true promises of God. But there's a flip side to that, and that's the bad. And we don't like to think about this, but in John 16 it says, these things have I spoken to you so that you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take courage. I have overcome the world. Jesus says, you're going to have tribulation. And then in Acts, Paul, after they had preached the gospel of the city and made a good number of disciples, they returned to Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch, strengthening the souls of the disciples, encouraging them to continue in the faith, and saying, good things are going to happen to you. No, saying it is through many tribulations that we must enter the kingdom of God. How about this verse? Rejoicing in hope, persevering in tribulation, devoted in prayer. Ephesians, therefore I ask you not to become discouraged about my tribulations in your behalf, since they are your glory. Romans. And not only this, but we also celebrate in our tribulations, knowing that tribulation brings about perseverance. And James, of course. Consider it great joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you experience various trials, tribulations, because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance, and let endurance have its full effect, so that you may be mature and lacking in nothing. The truth is, friends, there will never be a time in your life when there's only good stuff coming to you. We wish it were, but that's not the gospel, and that's what not Jesus says, and that's not what the Bible declares. We're always thankful for one thing in spite of something else. Now, for instance, I want you to do something right now. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand or do anything like that, but I want you to think of something right now that you're thankful for. Right now in your life, think of something that you say, I'm thankful for that right now in my life. Now, I want you to think of something in your life right now that you're not thankful for. That's tough. I want you to think of something right now that you wish would go away, that you wish weren't there. Something you wish that God hadn't placed in your life. You get the point? How can you and I say that what happened in this woman's life was total evil, when out of it came 3 precious lives that she would die for? You see, that's where Romans 8:28 comes in. You know that verse. For God causes all things to work together for good. See, only God can do that. When we try to do that, we mess it up. We do. I think sometimes, God, I can do this, I can handle this. But then if I were smart enough to handle everything, then that would qualify me as God's counselor, and God doesn't need my puny counsel. He really doesn't. So, we get to the end of our story now, and Jacob's crossing the river to meet his brother Esau. Following morning, they see him coming, but he's limping real bad, and his hair's all messed up, his clothes are torn, it looks like he's been in a big dog fight. Jacob, what happened to you last night? He says, oh, I got blessed last night. And you watch him limp away, and you say to yourself, that doesn't look like any Christian, victorious Christian that I've ever seen. No, they usually don't. They usually walk with a limp, something to remind them where they got the blessing of God, got the power of God. So, God's grace, good and bad run on parallel tracks, my message, in a believer's life. Understand that. But understand that God's behind the scene in all of it to work His grace into your life so that you can be transformed into His image. That's the goal. Remember the end goal when you're going through something that's tough, that God's going to use it. God's going to bring about grace in your life to handle it, to withstand it, so that you can be a shining example of what He can do with this flesh and blood of ours. All right? God's grace often comes to us in uncomfortable forms. It's always sufficient, always enough, and always on time, friends. Understand that. Okay. Real quick song. Can I play a closing song for you? I know it's time to go, but I have to have you here. Andre Crouch and CeCe Winans. Andre Crouch, great. This is my time, all right? When I was young, in the young people's group, Andre Crouch was the guy we'd listen to. Great Christian songwriter. He went home to be with the Lord in 2015. He was 72 years old. But he wrote this great song called Through It All. You remember that probably, yeah. CeCe Winans sings it with him at the Brooklyn Tabernacle Choir. Have you ever been to the Brooklyn Tabernacle Choir, anybody? Ever experienced a service there? That'd be heaven to me. It would. I watch their YouTube videos all the time, and I just melt with worship when I watch the videos. Here's Andraé Crouch and CeCe Winans singing together the song.